Mideast Realities, a unique half-hour highlighting the real Middle East. It is a program of information that government and media often misrepresent or just don't want you to know. Get the news without bias. Facts without distortion. And most importantly, analysis from the experts. With your host and chairman of the Committee on the Middle East, Mark Bruzonsky. Each week, this program will feature an interview, discussion, or an event to help viewers understand the complex situation in today's Middle East, and especially the realities of U.S. policies toward that crucial region of the world. Mideast Realities.
With incitement like this, it didn't take long for the stones to come out. Hebron's young men aiming at the Jewish settlement in the divided city. That was followed by the predictable explosion and street battles between Israeli soldiers and Hebronites. Palestinians first claimed strategic rooftops to lob stones. And Israeli soldiers beat down Palestinian doors to deny them the high ground. Then came the Molotov cocktails. An Israeli soldier fires. See the rock bounce off his helmet. Israeli rubber-coated metal bullets claimed over 24 Palestinian casualties. This time, however, Israeli blood spilled as well. A Palestinian pipe bomb felled 2 soldiers, mangling one's leg. Blood flowed in the darkened passageways of Hebron.
This program is about what is called the Middle East peace process. I'm Mark Bruzonsky, producer and host of this weekly program, Mideast Realities, and I've been fortunate to have visited the Middle East region over 150 times. Sometimes a phrase or a location takes on a specific historical association. In addition to peace process, we hear about Camp David, Step by Step, terrorism, Madrid, Oslo, autonomy. Usually it's governments, very self-interested parties indeed, that give life to these terms. Then the mass media, usually working in tandem with these governments in one way or another, helps give the terms a life of their own. Everyone is then supposed to accept these concepts as legitimate and accurate. Those organizations and commentators who play by these rules and use the politically correct slogans are rewarded with grants and invitations, with TV and radio exposure. Others, no matter how great their expertise, find that they are usually not included in the discussion. Take Professors Noam Chomsky and Edward Said, for instance. Widely acknowledged in academic circles as towering intellectual giants, they are only rarely heard in the mass media when it comes to the Middle East, an area of major concern and passion for each of them. Precisely because they are critically independent and don't accept the veracity of these misleading and oftentimes duplicitous terms, they are pushed to the sidelines and disregarded. This program is about the actual realities of what is now so casually and yet so erroneously termed the Middle East peace process. For the past couple of years, we have made this unique weekly program. We call it Mideast Realities because we consistently try to discuss what is actually happening and to juxtapose these realities against what the political leaders and regional regimes say and do. During the years we've produced this program, we've interviewed or featured many key Middle East experts, including Chomsky and Said. So please, sit back for the next 20 minutes while we show you clips from past MER programs focusing on the realities of what is popularly known as the Middle East peace process. And if many of these things you're about to be exposed to don't sound familiar but are of interest, well, that's precisely why we feel the need for this program. It's also why we hope you'll get in touch by phone, email, or on the internet and find out how you can watch MERTV regularly.
In the region here, issues are much more complex. One would be questioning whether we are really having a situation of peace. Yes, right. My final conclusion is that it's not a peace between the Palestinians and the Israelis. It is a diktat situation. There is no guarantee that it will ever achieve the self-determination of the Palestinians. The opposite is rather the most expected. And at this juncture, one cannot talk of an agreement of peace that enjoys a consensus amongst Palestinians. The opposite is much closer to the truth.
And if the
Now, an authority which cannot seem to show its people anything but shortcomings in maintaining their national rights, rights for which they fought for a long time, which is incapable of doing things that could make the Palestinians feel a positive change, which fails to impose the rule of law, guarantee respect of private and public rights, and which concentrates on security measures against its people because they continue to resist Israeli occupation. This is an authority that cannot win much respect and appreciation of its people. At most, it can impose its presence on the nation by using more power or because there is no alternative in a nation passing through a serious stage of regression. Thank you.
We are not against the rule of law. In fact, we want the rule of law, but we want fairness and equality before the law. We want to feel that people have rights and they are dignified after so many years of brutality and oppression and humiliation at the hands of the Israelis. This is what people we are longing for, dignity, pride, and in fact, and sadly, Yasser Arafat and the Palestinian Authority has given only shame to the Palestinians.
policy. And since by definition the U.S. is pursuing the peace process, that is a definition incidentally, the peace process is by definition whatever the United States is doing, and it's to get the war. And the point of the war was in fact explained by George Bush while the missiles were falling. He said it's establishing a new world order, certainly for the Middle East, which is defined by 4 simple words: what we say goes, and which since 1971 the United States has flatly opposed and totally opposed and utterly prevented from proceeding. That's what's called the peace process. 25 years of refusal to allow any diplomatic process to proceed. I'll come back to that. But anyway, it's all over because it's all rescinded by the specific provisos of Oslo II. One can see the importance of not reporting it. In brief, what it comes down to is that the United States does what it wants, and its client where they want and how they want. In fact, total capitulation to the most extreme U.S. demands from 1971, which have been held in virtual isolation. And that's a matter of much significance. If you want a sort of an analogy to get a sense of what happened, it's kind of as if the state of New York, let's say, decided to withdraw its police forces from the slums in South Bronx and Buffalo and let them sort of run their own affairs, while keeping all of the urban areas where it's worthwhile living, the commercial and financial centers, the industrial areas, the suburban regions, the entire resources, and so on and so forth. Meanwhile, allowing turning the areas put aside, let's say South Bronx, over to mercenary forces run by the New York police, or state police, but from the outside. And so that's the standard pattern of colonial control. It's the pattern of the U.S., say the British in India. About 90% of India was controlled by Indian soldiers under the British Empire. The whites of South Africa and Rhodesia used mostly black forces. In fact, they're the ones who carried out the worst atrocities. The United States and Central America, we don't call that colonies, but that's just cosmetic. U.S. colonies in Central America are run by local terrorist forces called the Army or something like that. And that's, in fact, the standard style of colonial control. It's stupid for any colonial power to try to run, the local people with its own forces. Much better to get local mercenaries, usually brought from some other region or something like that. And Israel's finally recognizing that the only thing that makes any sense is to revert to the classic colonial pattern, the South African, Indian, British and India type pattern, in the areas that it's handing over to some degree of Palestinian authority. What is I doubt that Israel will keep all the territory it now has. That would be completely crazy, in fact. Probably they'll go back to something like the most extreme demands that have been put forth in the past. The current agreement is, in fact, way out at the extreme. In fact, what it looks like now is the Sharon Plan of 1981.
Question: how do we view the acts of resistance by Hamas and the Islamists? Palestinians are entitled to resort to all sorts of measures, including legitimate armed struggle, to try to rid themselves of occupation. The Israeli position, which is based on Israeli military power, and with heedlessness towards legality and legitimacy and United Nations resolutions, is actually an indirect call for violence. Of peace, but Israel has maintained its intransigent position, claiming all the Palestinian territory, and on the basis of which it continues to practice its settlement activity. Israel, in the recent time, killed so many Palestinians in cold blood, Palestinians that it apprehended and could have arrested, but it preferred to kill them. This moment, where the world community is still under the illusion that there is a credible peace process, the acts of Hamas are actually counterproductive to our benefit, because the world sees that there is a peace process going on, and these acts are destroying this only chance of achieving peace. But this is going to change very soon. The world is going to realize that this peace process is not really a peace process. It is obstructive. Thank you.
Now, how did he get to where he now is? The pathway began in Jerusalem, then part of the Palestine Mandate under British rule in 1935. He came to the United States at the age of 15, 1950, became a naturalized citizen in 1953, received his BA at Princeton and then his PhD at Harvard. Since then, he has held professorial positions at Columbia University. He now holds a distinguished endowed chair in English and comparative literature. He has, as far as I could discern, held every major fellowship known to man or beast. Center for Advanced Study in Behavioral Science, mind you, not cultural studies at Stanford. The National Endowment for the Humanities, the Guggenheim Foundation, the Social Science Research Council, among others. He is a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. He is the author of 13 books translated into 8 languages. And in addition to all of these things, he has been practicing for his performance tonight. Practicing in the form of 27 major endowed lectures that he has given, and lectures at well over 100 universities in the United States, Canada, the Arab world, United Kingdom, South Africa, and doubtless other places.
In my opinion, the peace agreement that was signed with the PLO. It was, I think, a Machiavellian document, a Machiavellian moment, seized by Peres and Rabin to, they found a demoralized and isolated leadership, Palestinian leadership, got them to sign an agreement which was not studied by lawyers or even by people who knew English on the Palestinian side. And what is in place now, this so-called autonomy, is in effect a way of continuing the Israeli occupation of the West Bank and Gaza, and in other words, asserting Israeli sovereignty over the whole of the land of historical Palestine, but doing it in a way that turns on the American media and says, oh, it's a great new moment of peace, it's you know, the handshake between Rabin and Arafat, and not looking at the situation on the ground, which allows the Israeli army to remain redeployed, but remains nonetheless, and gives Israel the consent of the Palestinians to control the borders, to control sovereignty, to control the sea, to control the air, to control security, to control foreign affairs, and to do this all in the name of peace. Want peace. But there are different kinds of pieces. There we come to the question of definition again. It's not just the clash of visions, but it's also how you define peace. And if you mean by peace, peace between equals, which is what I'm talking about. If you want to have a real peace between Israelis and Palestinians, it has to be between equals. It has to be between people who have the same rights as was achieved in South Africa, right? Rather than a peace, which is called a peace by the media, celebrated by Bill Clinton and others, but in fact promotes the continued subordination of the Palestinians and the denial of most of their rights. So I don't think the change has occurred in Israeli society, and I think that what we are watching is an extension of the policies of the last few years given a new twist. Debate, and my critique of the current peace process, as it's called, is that this is not a way of abating it. It's a way of simply deferring it for some length of time. But I think the problems will stay there. This is very difficult for Palestinians, for example, to accept the position forever of being second-class citizens, of politicians like President Clinton, who goes to the Middle East and gives speeches only about terrorism and violence, completely ignoring the fact that hundreds of thousands of millions of people are undergoing violence, injustice, poverty, suffering that provokes people. And of course the question is not that there is terrorism, but why there isn't more of it, given the incredible incredible inequalities that exist there, and so on. Moreover, what is often forgotten is that movements like Hamas and Islamic Jihad on the West Bank are essentially protest movements that go against the capitulationist politics of the PLO and mobilize the will to resist Israeli occupation practices, the expropriation of land, etc., which still goes on, even though
Let's talk about the peace process itself. It looks rather different to people in the region than it does to people in Washington, doesn't it?
I put peace process in quotation marks when I write about it in my newspaper. It's an American expression. It's definitely not a Middle Eastern expression. Well, I mean, all one can say about the, quote, peace process, unquote, now, is that it's dead. It's finished. It's over. And the most remarkable thing I find in coming now to the States is the degree to which people don't realize that. I have to live the reality of the Middle East, and I'm on the ground. And I have not met anyone in the past 2 to 3 months, including those who originally, wrongly in my view, believed it would work, who doesn't now believe it's dead and finished completely.
The phrase to domination process. What it's really about is American control of the region, isn't it?
I think it is about an American-Israeli peace. It is not about an Arab-Israeli peace. It's about a peace which is a piece of machinery which is produced by the United States and Israel together and is presented to the Arab world.
Resumed today, and the two sides must now figure out how to implement this deal. Joining us from Washington is Mark Bruzonsky, chair of the Jewish Committee on the Middle East. Thank you for being with us this morning.
Good morning, and thank you for inviting me.
Some people are calling this an unbelievable breakthrough, a major change in the way the Middle East is functioning now. Would you agree that that is so, or is it problematic?
Well, you know, every time there's a diplomatic deal, it's always called a major breakthrough. That's what the politicians who make the deals feel they have to say. The Israelis are doing pretty much what they've said they would always do. The talk of giving up Gaza, the talk of autonomy, the talk of giving back some of the territories for local rule has been something the Israelis have talked about for a long time. The change that you're witnessing is that Yasser Arafat, pressured as he is, losing his grip as he has been, without financial resources, finding himself cornered and without anywhere to go, has agreed to things that heretofore the Palestinian movement has always said they would never agree to. Now, there's no doubt that there's a major shift in the road ahead. Whether it's going to lead to a stable and just peace, to be very frank, I'm quite skeptical.
You're watching Washington, D.C., the South Lawn of the White House, where those people sitting there are waiting for an historic moment in Middle East politics. 3,000 invited guests who are waiting for the arrival of the players in this momentous occasion in which the PLO and Israel agree to recognize one another, and a timetable is put in place for Palestinian autonomy in the Gaza Strip and West Bank. It's a big day in Washington, D.C. We're going to be assisted in our coverage this morning of this event by Mark Bruzonsky in Washington.
It's an odd political marriage, and we've all been asked to come and witness the marriage of the oddest of the odd couples. On the other hand, the central issues of the conflict have been left unresolved. We don't know what's going to happen to Jerusalem, to settlements, to Palestinian refugees, to Palestinian statehood. It may well be a start. Many people are saying it is a start to real mutual recognition and Palestinian statehood. So far, what it is a defeated Palestinian leadership that was totally bankrupt, cornered, had nowhere to go, and instead of declaring defeat, they decided to accept what they always said they wouldn't accept, which is very limited autonomy, and declare it defeat. And that's why Yasser Arafat is here. He conceded, he cried uncle, he did what he had always been told he must do, and what he'd always said he wouldn't do. Having done it, he was told to come and sign the document.
I don't see any way of making much, at least I can't find much difference between Labour and Likud on these matters. The basic point was made quite well, I thought, by Benjamin Ben-Eliezer, describing future settlement plans in an interview right after the signing of Oslo II. He said, Fuad does everything quietly, with the complete protection of the Prime Minister. And he proceeded to spell out extensive development plans, including 2 circles of settlement around Greater Jerusalem. The term to be used is natural growth, he explained. We'll build quietly, and the Americans will pretend not to understand. That's the history of the last 30 years. The Likud style makes this pretense difficult. That's the main reason why the United States government and American intellectuals, particularly the ones toward the left and dovish end of the spectrum, have consistently preferred labor. That enables them to support the policies while maintaining their humanistic image. Likud doesn't give them that luxury. The nuisance. When South Africa instituted the Bantustan policy in the early 1960s, that was not called a peace process, although it merited the term every bit as much as what is happening here right now. The reason is that the United States did not support the establishment of the African homelands, whereas it is implementing a very similar program right here. So therefore this one is a peace process and that one wasn't. The term peace process is used conventionally to refer to whatever the world dominant power happens to be doing, often undermining peace and diplomacy, as the U.S. has been doing for years in the Arab-Israel conflict.
But when the attack came, it was from one of their own, an off-duty soldier in army uniform. The sudden violence underlined just how volatile Hebron is, an explosive mix of fundamentalist Jews and fundamentalist Arabs claiming the same land. Hebron is still the stumbling block. Scuffles today between Palestinians and settlers underline.
Thank you for watching our program. We hope you've learned a great deal about the Middle East peace process, and we hope you'll get in touch by phone, by email, or on the internet to find out more about MERTV and more about MER Weekly on the internet. Thank you for watching.